Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Tim, and I'm gathered today with my friend Chelsea Cordell.
Hey.
Hey, Chelsea. Chelsea has been a very strong point of wisdom in my life over the course of my marriage, being in premarital stuff, just being friends. She was part of the social group I was in when I first discovered Jesus, and has just always been one of those friends that is consistently thinking of what's good, I guess, and what's healthy, and just willing to offer perspective. So I asked her if she'd come and chat and hang out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess just to dive right in, Chelsea, just so people know a little bit about your background.
Mhm.
I personally was not one of those people that was indoctrinated, and a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is based on being loved by Jesus and loving other people
True.
from that same perspective. What was it like for you growing up? Were you one of those people that grew up in the church and had Bible studies, or were you one of those people where it's like, well, just process of elimination, trying to figure out what's right from wrong, what's loving from what's not? Here's how I discovered. Like, what was it for you?
So my history background is that I am the fourth child in a family that very much was involved in church. Both my parents are Christians, and pretty much everyone in my family at least claims to know God.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they actually do, like, that's kind of their deal.
Oh, like the Southern Baptist Social Christian Status Update type thing.
Sometimes, yeah, I
Yeah.
think. So I went to something called Awanas as a small child, and I also went to the like summer music camps that church had. And at one of those, they told us about Jesus, and something just connected. I was about 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a really spotty memory of childhood, so I don't remember this moment. But
Mm-hmm.
my mom tells me that I was supposed to be taking a nap, but actually, I was apparently not taking a nap and instead came out of my nap time and said, I just asked Jesus to come into my heart.
It's
And
really funny.
she couldn't be mad because that was something she wanted to happen. So I don't know if it was real or if, I just really came up with a good excuse to not be napping.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember a time not knowing about Jesus or God. I did grow up in a church that really didn't talk about the Holy Spirit very much.
Mm-hmm.
He was always talked in terms of like past tense. So that was very different. But I did have experiences with the supernatural growing up that I didn't have a framework for because he didn't get talked about because, spiritual things just didn't get talked about. It was always about rules and following the rules and making sure you're doing the right thing. So it was more of
Mm.
like the good citizen type Christian, very
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah.
So I didn't learn about Holy Spirit until I was in my mid
Sorry.
20s. Yeah, so I didn't learn about Holy Spirit till I was in my mid 20s,
Mm-hmm.
actually in California. And I went to a Bible study and they were studying the book of Acts and they decided to test it out and see if it was still real and if it was still active. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's really where I got my true relationship part of the equation in there and started learning, oh, these things where I have just like known what to do or just had the perfect word to tell someone, that's actually not because I'm really super intuitive and helpful and really good at things and just know things. That's because God was showing up and speaking out of my mouth in those occasions. So that's kind of the short version of
Mm-hmm.
my story.
I got you. And I think it's really cool that you highlighted the relationship part because
Yeah.
that's a lot about what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. True.
So, a while back, guys, I don't even know when it was, maybe 2, 3 years ago, something.
Mm.
In the recent couple of years, Chelsea introduced to me the concept of the relationship between intimacy and commitment. And I got to thinking about that and how that applies to my life. And it just honestly blew my mind. I don't know if this is a Chelsea Cordell original or if you stole it from someplace. Like, where did that come from? Like, how did you come to the conclusion that, oh, these two pieces fit together?
So that's a really interesting story. As it turns out, lots of my great ideas come while driving,
Mm-hmm.
especially driving to and from the mountains of North Carolina. So I don't know if there's a special blessing on Highway 40 or 421,
Good old 40
but
West.
a lot of good revelation comes on that road. So I was driving up to the mountains, visiting my family, and coming back down, and had a question that was just kind of mulling around in my brain, because I do exist in a group of young adults who are doing community, and I was like, wow, there's so many great people and no one is dating each other. Like, what is this? Like, you'd think this would be the biggest meat market where everyone, finds their person. So why?
Well, I mean, that's how it felt back then.
Yeah, but like no one was doing anything. So it was
Well, I
like
mean, they were ninja dating.
they were ninja. They weren't really
And
dating.
we call ninja dating that because
Sneaky
it's
dating.
like you sneak around and you do it without the commitment of dating.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, hey, let's get coffee because, maybe, I don't know. But then you like didn't really show interest. So like, I guess it was just friends.
No harm, no foul.
No harm, no foul. Yeah. So I was trying to figure out like what was the dynamic that was off about like why people weren't being brave in communicating their feelings or what they wanted to even try. They weren't even trying going on dates. So I was like, Lord, like, what is the deal? Like, why are people afraid to try this? And I realized just from a human perspective, like in a group with friends, you're all friends. We're all scared of the what if it doesn't work, right? That's the big thing. Like, we're not really able to be vulnerable enough to ask the what if it does work positive side, but the negative side of like, what if it doesn't work out then?
Which is the crazy thing, because when people did actually start dating, 90%
so many of them worked out.
Yeah, we all got married.
Like 8 couples all got married in 1 year. It was great when everyone decided to give it a try. But yeah, but before that, like people weren't dating, and so I was like, oh, it must be about breaking up and like the worry around that. And so I, just asked God. I was like, God, if breaking up is the problem, but like you already knew relationally that not everything was going to work out. So like, what is the key to successfully breaking up was actually the question I asked. Like, how do you break up well? Which is kind of seems of a backwards way to figure out that answer, but it's the question I had. So I asked that question and I found him responding in my spirit. He said, the key to breaking up well is of course how you carry the relationship, and the key to the relationship being what it needs to be so that you can break up well is that the level of commitment dictates the level of intimacy. So the level of intimacy should never surpass the level of commitment. And that's across all fronts. That's across your mind connections, your emotion connections, your physical connections, yes, and your spiritual connections. And so as I wrap my brain around that, I realized like, there are different levels of commitment, and this is why we need to know what those levels of commitment entail as far as what is healthy intimacy at those levels. And so I often think of it as like a tiered cake, right? So you have like the bottom layer is acquaintances, and they get, relatively minor access to you. Friends get more access to you. Best friends can get more access to you. Then you have like dating, which honestly like is marginally more than friends in reality. We tend to like deep dive and put it on like the same level as marriage, which is part of why we get in trouble.
It's so scary, man.
Because we're like, oh, we have to deep dive with this person because we're dating them, but like actually it's just like a step above friends where it's like, hey, like is there potential here? Like it's a pretty low stakes thing if you do it right. You should be able to walk back from dating to friends relatively easy if you do the level of intimacy appropriately. And then of course there's marriage, or engaged, which has more significance, more access, marriage, which has even more. But even within marriage, and you can probably attest to this, there's still spots where they don't even have access to it. It's just you and God. And that's healthy. That's how you keep codependency away, essentially.
The C word.
Yeah. So when I have this, right? So like my friends, they know certain things about me. When I'm dating someone, I allow more vulnerability, but not a whole lot more. And if I do that, then I can take a step back from that to friends and be happy for them if they move on with someone else versus if I've invested so much of myself, more than we actually committed to, then it's really hard to go backwards at that point. Sometimes impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just my experience. And when he told me that, I was like, man, that's such a good revelation of how to carry yourself and how to honor yourself and the other person, to have those levels and those boundaries in place. And then that takes away the scaries and it makes it a lot more low stakes. So that way dating is like exploration versus like,
Mm-hmm.
we're getting married.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important thing to call out, that dating is exploration
Mm-hmm.
and not consecrating yourself to the idea of we're getting married.
Yeah.
Because I think when my wife and I started dating, you guys are pretty good friends.
Yeah.
When we first started dating, we were all in, man. Like,
Yeah.
people were like, you guys are so touchy. You know, like, there was a lot of intimacy immediately, but
Yeah.
because there was so much intimacy immediately, it necessitated more commitment, which caused a lot of problems, caused a lot of intense conversations that would not have been intense if we had spread them out through the course of a year or 2 years
Yeah.
or 3 years.
Yeah.
My father-in-law has something called the Bart Plan, and I think this would embarrass Ariane if she ever knew that I talked about this on a video. But he has something called the Bart Plan, where he believes that you should date for 3 years before you get married.
Wow.
And I remember hearing him say that. It pissed me off, man, because I was like, I want the intimacy of marriage, which we all know what that is. You know, especially if you're in the Christian world, we know what that is, especially.
Sex.
Talking about sex, because I didn't have premarital
We're all
sex.
excited about it.
Yeah, sex is great, you know, and it's not something you should be afraid of, but
No,
you know,
it should be
it's something you have to
celebrated
pay
for
for.
sure.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
and I don't mean like
There's
buy
a
a
cost.
prostitute, but that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I remember the 3-year plan, and that frustrated me because I wanted the intimacy without the commitment.
Yeah.
Or I wanted the intimacy with shortened commitment. Basically, I wanted a $20 steak, and I only wanted to pay $2.
Yeah. Which sounds really great. But
It sounds
it's
really
very
great, yeah.
self-defeating.
Well, I mean, you see a lot of people that get into that, and then you find out, oh, there's interest that I have to pay because I bought this on credit.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to think about it. I like that.
Yeah, thanks. But let's talk about that for a second, because you were talking about value, and how as commitment increases, so does intimacy. Where does value play into that? Because you were talking about breaking up, and you know, when we subject ourselves to relationships, there's always an element of risk. There's always an element of, does my value actually have value in your eyes to the degree of you choosing me? How does that play into it?
So the healthy answer.
The healthy answer.
The healthy answer is we carry our own inherent value because we're human. And because, you know, from my background at least, we're crafted in God's image, and that's each person. So we have inherent value as children of God, is how we say it. And so a little bit of that, as far as identity goes, is like you as a whole individual person need to know your identity, need to understand who you are, need to understand your value within yourself. The other person also has to do that work. You know, I think it's hard when both haven't done their work and they both don't know who they are, and they're trying to figure out who they are to each other from each other, and then they don't have answers. You know, an equally difficult situation is if one person knows who they are and the other person is trying to figure out who they are from the other person. Because relationship is about not what you can get. If it's about what you can get, you've already lost at that point. It has to be about what you can give. And so part of having that boundary, having that understanding of what intimacy isn't about, like the joke is like it's into me see, to like give someone a reference for what that is without having to look it up. But
into me see, I get.
I know, it's kind of cool, huh? Yeah. Right? But really, intimacy is allowing someone to see you and also doing the work to see them. Like it's an equal exchange. And I think that equal exchange is really the key to things, right? So even within those levels, if you have someone that's wanting to move this direction and another person that's wanting to move this direction, like you're not equivocally seeing each other at that point. You're still not actually being seen or
Yeah.
seeing the other person. So a lot of it has to do with having that kind of open communication.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're on the same level. Cool. Great. Do we want to move forward? Great. Do we want to move backwards? Great. You know, and keeping it very much something that is really over communicated, because we as a society are not good about communicating our internal world to anyone else. We're actually really bad at communicating our internal worlds, generally speaking, unless you have done your work and own who you are and represent that to the person and say, is this something you're interested in?
Yeah.
As a free gift.
Yeah. And man, that transfers across every relationship that you have, not just romantic relationships, because Chelsea, earlier you said that your intimacy cannot exceed the level of commitment, but also the level of commitment can't exceed the level of intimacy. And what I mean by that is, think about your work relationship. What if your boss says, hey, could you stay late? Now, you get paid salary or you get paid hourly or whatever. But your boss asks you to stay late or work off the clock or something, or ask you to do something that's far over and beyond your job description. Basically, he's asking for more commitment than the intimacy of what you're getting paid or appreciated for.
True.
And that's also unhealthy.
Yeah.
But how does that play into relationships as well? In unhealthy ways? Like what is an indicator that that's going on that people can say?
Imbalance.
Oh yeah, commitment imbalance.
Gotcha. I would say commitment imbalance, where the commitment is higher than the intimacy, is a space where you're being asked to give up really your autonomy without being given vulnerability in exchange. So in that kind of case, it would be something like, if we were in a relationship or even in our friendship, right? And you're like, I need you to show up in these ways. I need you to do this for me. I need you to do this for me. I need you to do this for me. You need to meet my needs these ways, but you're not giving me any kind of vulnerability in exchange for that. That gets out of balance really fast. And that can happen a lot if someone's been hurt. In vulnerability, you know, they get really cautious about extending their heart or their emotional space or their internal world. Really, vulnerability, we're talking about our internal world. So someone functioning only in their external world and expecting you, even sometimes, to give you their internal world. So like an uneven exchange of internal world can be that too. That can really throw off the dynamic as far as like building, because the whole point is to build trust, to build a relationship together. And so not giving vulnerability tears down trust.
Yeah.
Expecting vulnerability without giving someone an exchange tears down trust. And so, and even giving too much vulnerability that isn't being asked for can tear down trust.
That's me.
Right? Because it's like, oh, I'm being handed like a whole lot of responsibility now, but like, I didn't ask for this.
Oh man, so I have this one friend, and you know this person, but I'm not going to say who it is, and they are a very different personality from me. And I've always wanted to be friends with them. And it's been an insecurity of mine because they have a lot of great things about them that I don't have. Or I don't naturally have different proficiencies, just character, whatever. But we had this conversation and I said, so why did our friendship never work out? I just asked them that question honestly. And they said, well, quite frankly, you're way too deep for me. Because I would go to those spaces and they
weren't ready for it.
They weren't ready for it, you know? And it's like, what my commitment to the commitment that we had to the relationship, or what I viewed, like the currency exchange, the way he viewed his currency of commitment was much different than I viewed it. It's like my level of commitment here equals this level of intimacy. And he didn't see it this way. He thought, okay, well, that level of intimacy is way up here for me.
Yeah.
And so
his levels were different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, just the idea of going through life, because we're in our 30s, you know, I'm married, you're dating, rubbing it in your face. I'm just kidding. Like that's just how it is. You know, we all have different life seasons, but the idea that you're going to find somebody that is in the same season of life, that likes similar things to you, is going in the same direction, is location-wise in the same proximity. Headspace is not out of a broken relationship, is in a good heart place to be in a new relationship. You both have the courage to say so. Like, all these things have to line up in order for the possibility for a relationship to happen. But I like what you were saying about how it's an exploration. And just thinking about the verse in the Bible where it talks about being equally yoked.
Oh, yeah.
That always annoyed me because it just seemed like one of those Christian ways to get out of jail free in a relationship. Oh, we're not, because that happened to
We're not
me.
equally yoked.
I had a girl in my early 20s that broke
It's a
up
good
with me.
cop-out.
It's such a cop. Well, I don't want to.
Oh, no,
I'm
it's a
still
great
working.
excuse.
Yeah, it's a really good excuse.
It's a very valuable excuse.
but I think we don't view it with the context, or in the context that it needs to be viewed, like the way you see it. Like the way it was always modeled for me was, oh, well, they're a Christian, I'm not, so we can't do this, right?
Yeah.
And that's way too black and white. But as far as being equally yoked and exploring things and being okay when things don't work out, like, how does that play into the whole intimacy and commitment thing?
So a portion of this answer is interesting for a number of reasons. So when I think of dating and exploration, actually love pop culture and movies. And so a lot of my references end up coming from there, and my life feels very much like a movie sometimes. So in this particular instance, there's a quote from Sleepless in Seattle where Tom Hanks is trying to explain to his son why he is dating this woman. And he says, well, that's what you do. You try people on and see if they fit. And I was like, wow, that is such like a simplified chef's kiss version of what dating is. It is you try people on and see if it fits. That's it. That's the level of commitment we're talking about. In reality, I think actually oftentimes the non-Christian world understands those kinds of levels better than we do, because we put such an emphasis on lifelong commitment and finding your person and settling down and starting which is all good things. But if we start at such a high stakes level, it makes it very difficult to actually keep intimacy in check. So a lot of my conversations with young adults, as I've learned a lot about dating in my 20s and 30s, has been keep it low stakes. Absolutely. Because the second you make something high stakes, it gets a lot harder to see clearly. So you want to keep it low stakes. This is just trying people on. If it works, great. If it doesn't, it's not about that. It can be great and it can be good and it can still not work. That's a reality. Because both people do have to choose. And there are things that have to coordinate to make things run smoothly. I've really struggled for a long time, honestly, with the idea of the one, right? And so I'm trying to rescue people from that idea at this point. Because if everyone has just one person out there, well, if one person chooses wrong, we're all in trouble. So that just can't be how it works. So my sister told me one time, I was like, how did you know, right, that this was the right person? And she was like, well, I think there's honestly probably a half a dozen people you can be happy with in the world. And I was 18 at the time. So I was like, ew, that's gross. What? No, that's so unromantic. But honestly, as I've gotten older, as I've understood healthy love, healthy boundaries, and the beauty that choice is, because it is beautiful and powerful, is that for someone to choose to love you, because love is a choice and an action and not a feeling, that's actually much more romantic and much more important and powerful and impactful, because it isn't just oh man, I just didn't have a choice, I guess I'm here, and if it changes, I'm gone.
You know what frustrates me is all my life growing up, and guys, once again, I was not raised in the church. I was raised in the South, and I guess I associated mostly with a Christian, but my dad was a Buddhist growing up, or associated with Buddhism. But for me, with all this, I was Oh, Disney movies. I like the picture you paint of relationship. It just seems so magical and easy. But
Wouldn't
going
that be
back,
nice?
well, dude, going back now and looking at those relationships, I'm like, man, all you princes are not great people. Like, and
Yeah.
even the princesses, it's like
Yeah.
you engage in love and you just jump into relationships and commitment and all that stuff just because you feel it.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when you don't feel it anymore? And
Yeah.
they don't talk about that in the Disney movies or in
Yeah.
Cosmo magazine and stuff. It's like so much of our society is feelings based.
Yes.
And I think that's why a lot of people struggle with the relationship between intimacy and commitment, and they don't want to pay the price of admission.
Yeah. Because they want it to be instant
Yeah.
the second they feel something.
And guys, I just want to stress when I say they, I mean me too.
Yes. Definitely me too.
Yeah.
Trying to unlearn that one.
Yeah. So you were talking about, or we were talking about value. Let's say that you're engaging in trying someone on, right? And they don't fit. Trying someone on, they don't fit. Try another person on, they don't fit. People, or I want to say parties, not just people, parties that do that in our society are often demonized as a player or an employer who just doesn't see the value in employees, or you know what I'm saying, where they have expectations and they're just looking at it from a regulatory stance of, okay, this person just doesn't meet my expectations or I don't meet their expectations. Because when I was working my job, there were so many times where people would submit an application asking for more money than I could pay them. It's like, okay, this is not a fit, obviously. But how do you think we could avoid, or how do you reconcile the concept of being labeled as a player or somebody who is just using people, saying, well, no, I'm just trying, no, just being, I guess, not flippant. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. And you know, part of that is people's perceptions, which we can't control. You can only control how you handle yourself. And so, you know, keeping in mind that paradigm and handling yourself honorably leads to not having, essentially, the player thing comes from like a string of heartbreak following you around more than just the fact that you've dated multiple people. Because generally that string of heartbreak is because you've asked for more than you were willing to give, guys or girls, you know? And so if it's a difference seeing someone be like, hey, I gave it the good old college try, I would say 3 dates, because let's be real, on a first date, no one's completely genuine. They're trying their best. Second date, they might settle down a little. Third date, you're probably going to get more of a genuine who they are. And so I would say give it at least 3 dates and then have an evaluation. But a lot of it is just an honest cultural shift that needs to happen in the dating world. You know, I think of my parents, and they used to be so confused by how we date now, because they were like, we just, like, dating is just going on dates. Like, why are you guys so strung out on this? Because it used to be like, you just would date someone if you liked them, and if you decide to break up, then you try someone else on. Like, it was just a part of the culture was, you know, you're not necessarily going to find your person on the first person. Now, having said that, if your expectations are for the you complete me version of movie, like, I can guarantee you're not going to find your person if that's what you're looking for. Because everyone is an adjustment. Absolutely everyone is an adjustment. Now, some people are healthy adjustments, which are good compromises, ways to learn or grow or stretch. Maybe they have slightly different interests than you, or they see the world slightly different. Those are things you can bend on. But those core values, if you're being asked to compromise on those, that's when it gets into unhealthy. When you have that self-abandonment.
So many notes.
So it's like you have, you know, and there's not a defined line necessarily. I would say the difference between trying someone on to see if they fit, that's good. That's healthy. That's normal. You should have questions about who you're dating. You should not know right away.
I mean, it's very similar to the hiring process.
Yeah.
It's like I know exactly what I'm looking for because I'm hiring for a position that has
Mm-hmm.
an outline of expectations, pay,
Yeah.
requirements,
Mm-hmm.
minimum years of experience,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And the same goes for romantic relationships, I
Yeah.
would imagine.
Absolutely. And that same concept of an interview, right? That first date, that's an interview. You're not really getting the real story. You're
Hmm.
getting the resume that's been padded.
Yes.
So you need to like keep that in mind. You also need to be realistic in that no matter how much potential someone has or says they have, like they may or may not reach that potential. So you gotta be very realistic and be like, this is who it is. Is that if they never change anything about them, am I okay with that?
Well, that's that currency exchange we were
Yeah.
talking about. It's like, man, guys, so I'm married and I made the decision to commit to one woman, and getting to that point was actually really unnerving because there are so many options out there, especially in our circle. Like there
Mm-hmm.
were so many amazing women, so
Mm-hmm.
many amazing women that had good hearts, were headed in healthy directions,
Mm-hmm.
had good perspectives on what it's like to love somebody and all that stuff. And deciding on one single person, it's not a light commitment, especially when it's for
Yeah.
the rest of your life. And you just have to decide what your price is.
Yeah.
And if you relate it to Jesus, Liz Chappell, if you haven't seen her interview or I guess chat that we did, she made a very profound statement. She
Mm-hmm.
said, I believe that if it was just me on this earth and nobody else, Jesus still would have died for me.
True.
And if Jesus is supposed to be the culmination of love, that was a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you think about that, and it's like Jesus died for me. He died for you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, John 3:16 said, "For God loved first, He gave." But He also did the same for the people that go to the psych ward at Baptist Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Those people that you pass by and you just don't register their value.
Yeah.
And it's like, I guess this is my question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you evaluate for yourself
Mm-hmm.
the exchange as to whether or not this person is worth the intimacy?
That's a good question. Um, I would say that in my lifetime, I have not done a good job necessarily of identifying safe people. Because a lot of it, like to create safety, you have to be a safe person. That's one half, right? But also the other person also has to choose to be a safe person. So a lot of intimacy is predicated on the idea that both people are choosing to be safe people. So you're not going to go up to a random stranger who has no commitment and tell them your whole life story and expect them to be able to give you an equal exchange. That would just be ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But your friend who's going to walk through life with you, you can trust with more because you've built more.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very much, I like the kind of bridge concept, right? Like you are building a bridge from one side and the other person is building a bridge from the other side, and you're going to meet at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you'll meet equally so that it's not off balance one way or
Mm-hmm.
the other. But until that bridge can hold the weight of whatever revelation or vulnerability you're about to hand someone,
Mm-hmm.
then it could fall in the water.
That's actually really smart.
So someone who doesn't have a vested interest in your life and walking through it with you, you should not necessarily trust them with a ton of your vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
The more someone is willing to walk with you in life, i.e., friendship, certain level, dating, stronger level, engaged, stronger level, married, stronger level,
Mm-hmm.
like all of those are different levels of which someone is going to be walking with you through life. Closeness, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So their responsibility intersects more because they're going to walk through life with you. Which means you can hand them more vulnerability because they're taking on more responsibility.
Yeah, it's the whole trust thing, being built. When we were in Atlanta a couple weeks ago, and we were just walking along, and this guy comes up, and I made the mistake of locking eyes with him. And before that, I was just talking to Ariane about how God was talking to me about, see that person, they have value. See that person, value, 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 value. I was like, okay. So this guy's walking up and he's just asking, I think he asked us like where we were going, and it's like, oh, we're just walking around. And he's like, he just starts telling us where all the local restaurants are, and oh, this place is good. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. This is the Southern Atlanta, Georgia hospitality I've been waiting for. You
Your
know,
personal
where's my
tour guide.
Yeah. But then he was like, hey man, if you could just help me out with a few bucks, you know, I give people directions and stuff for, you know, trying to make a few dollars. And I was annoyed. And the reason I was annoyed is because he expected something of me without allowing me the choice of committing to him.
Yeah.
And
so
it's
he
like,
offered you intimacy, but there was no commitment.
well, he offered me intimacy and expected commitment.
And expected commitment in return.
Yeah, and it was not my choice.
Yeah.
And I got really annoyed because it's like, you know, if he had just said, hey man, do you mind, are y'all visiting? Can I give you directions? I'm just trying to drum up a few dollars and use my expertise. Completely different, because it's it's my choice. It's my opportunity.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people.
But he put his bridge out there, and you hadn't built a bridge, and he was like, no, jump.
Yeah, and so many people do that. Like, to give you an example, like if a guy makes a move on a girl when they're just on their first date, and you know they're in the movie theater, and he starts sliding his hand up her thigh, it's like, she didn't choose that.
Yeah.
She didn't choose to commit that much, but she's now in a place where he's wanting that intimacy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really dangerous.
And taking away choice, which
taking
again,
away choice,
right?
yeah.
It's all about choice.
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually not only selling her short, but he's selling him short.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's losing out on her getting to choose.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll never know if she wanted that.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't brave enough to ask.
So, this part right
Bravery.
here. Yeah. Well, I was talking to somebody earlier about why God put the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
If he knew that there was the opportunity that we were going to choose that, why would he put it there in the first place? And there's that risk of relationship, you know? It's like, are you going to choose me, or are you going to choose the tree?
Mm-hmm.
And guys, being in any relationship, there's always that question. Are you going to choose me or the circumstance? Are you going to see my value or the value of the circumstance?
Yeah.
And you see this all the time in jobs, man. Like with my previous job, I made a mistake, something HR related. I had the opportunity to choose myself above the circumstance and above the person that I had hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's like, was I actually committed to that person as my boss or as his boss?
Yeah.
You know, or was I committed more to myself and
self-preservation?
Yeah. And, you know, if God gives us the will to choose and he walks with us through that, you know, and that's the crazy thing I think the verse says, for yet we were all sinners.
Yeah.
You know, even though we messed up. Beth Johnson was talking to us about, in our premarital counseling, about affairs. And she said,
serious.
If my husband ever cheated on me, that would hurt. But it would hurt more so if I have the right perspective, since I'm committed to him in marriage, that he is operating from a place of brokenness. And I hurt because he's broken, and something in him allowed him or caused him or influenced him to choose this. Yeah. I'm like, man, that is a commitment.
Yeah.
That's like getting the intimacy of bearing your heart even when it hurts. And I think that's a scary concept for people.
Oof. Yeah. Yeah. We, especially Western culture, are not used to putting ourselves out there in that way. Mm-hmm. That's sacrificial love at that point. And that's definitely something that's modeled by Jesus, you know, like that same verse, right? Like, while we were yet in our muck, he chose to love us. Mm-hmm. Like, how rare is that?
Yeah, and I think that's honestly what we're all looking for. And man, it's so tough because since we never address intimacy and commitment in our lives, and we never address our expectations, are they too high? Are they too low? You know, we just jump into a relationship, whether it's a business relationship, a friendship, whatever, and we don't communicate. We don't talk about our expectations. We don't communicate, hey, what you want from me is a little bit more than I'm committed, or you're committed right now, or I want more than what you're giving me because I'm putting a lot into this. That is a very healthy conversation, but because we don't have that, when sacrifice is brought to the table and you're tasked to choose, we look at ourselves first and we think, I shouldn't have to choose this. I deserve the intimacy. Yeah. It's all about me. Pleasure me.
How does this serve me?
Yeah.
instead of how can I serve you.
Yes. Yes. Uh, so let's go back to dating for a second.
Okay.
You said trying people on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I want to know what you think about this, but I was
Okay.
talking to somebody the other day, and they were communicating to me why they didn't want to ask people out and why they were afraid of risking committing to a date or 2
Mm-hmm.
dates or just risk. And I said, well, man, it's like the worst case scenario of dating is communicating to somebody that they are valuable enough in your eyes. That's the worst case scenario. They say no, they walk away realizing, hey, somebody thought I was enough to ask out.
Yeah.
How is that a bad thing?
Yeah. Well, I think, it's the same risk with um anything, you know. We telling someone you love them, um, even sharing good news. Sometimes good news is actually more vulnerable than sharing bad news, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because bad news everyone can commiserate, but good news is like singular. But I think with dating, um, it's especially vulnerable because, well, we don't date as many people as we're friends with, so
Mm-hmm.
it's not as common. So we're not as practiced at it. And then there is something inherent in us that dislikes rejection or abandonment. And
Mm-hmm.
so we walk in and instead of assuming the best, we kind of assume the worst,
Yeah.
which is sad because that's a little bit of us not knowing our own value, right? It's not arrogant to say, man, if they choose to walk away, they're actually missing out because I'm great,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that about yourself. I think most people walk into a situation being like, oh no, do you like me? Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
even, back in November, I had that revelation that I have been asking my whole life. The only question I asked was, do you like me? And if they liked me, that was it. That I guess we're dating now. I never, ever, ever considered, do I like you? Because that I had to open myself up to ask that question. And
Mm-hmm.
that felt very scary and very vulnerable. And so as long as you liked me, then that's all I cared about because, well, you like me, that's giving me value because I didn't understand it
So
for myself.
you're only, I guess the price that you were charging for the admission of your intimacy was, oh, you like me,
Yeah,
not
you're paying
I
attention
approve
to
of
me.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it led me into a lot of relationships that weren't healthy because they gave me interest, but actually my actual value demands a higher price that I didn't recognize. And so I didn't charge that admission.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I've learned like actually this is what my value is. This is what I value
Mm-hmm.
in a partner. I'm also going to interview you as you're interviewing me. So I don't just have to pass a test for you, you have to pass my test as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
not testing like in a bad way, but just like, evaluation. That's what it is. It's exploration and evaluation. That's what dating is. And
Yeah.
you want a partner who meets you at a certain level, even if they can't meet all your needs and shouldn't meet all your needs. No singular human can carry the weight of everyone's needs.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work out. But asking myself that question, having the time processing and saying, oh, I'm also choosing this, not just that you're choosing me. Now it's an equal exchange
Mm-hmm.
in that space. Um, so that was a new concept of like knowing my own value and therefore being able to evaluate
Mm-hmm.
in that scenario of dating.
Hmm. What do you think are some of the causes of people not allowing themselves to maintain equal levels of a commitment and intimacy? I guess the question is more heavily focused on why do you think people don't walk in that? Why do you think people don't test that? Why do you think? Do you get what I'm asking?
Well, I think that's probably a question of identity
Yeah.
for the most part. I think that if you don't know your value, then you won't operate out of that value. And also, you won't demand an equal exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I didn't understand my value, because I didn't understand what I brought to the table, because we get told that that's selfish or self involved or arrogant, so often. Um, I didn't even know to be like, here's my portfolio. I thought my portfolio was this, and actually it's this. This is what I bring to the table. But because I was only thinking I was here, I was allowing myself to be in relationship and only require someone meeting me here instead of meeting me here. And so the quality, not that they were bad people, but we just weren't in the same space. They literally couldn't, capacity wise, meet me
Yeah.
equally.
So as you're going through the process of evaluation with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
I know that for a lot of us, we think that time is ticking,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
especially like, as you said, if you're dating in your 30s, because
Mm-hmm.
I was dating in my 30s too,
Yeah.
you know, and I guess it's more so for women, or more intense for women because of the
Mm.
whole like wanting to have children for a lot of them
And
and
your eggs
stuff.
dying off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super great. Love the
Um,
science.
yeah. Thanks God. Thanks fall. Thanks Eve.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Adam had a part in it too, so.
that's true. Um, how do you, as far as time goes, how do you prevent yourself, or what should you watch out for
Mm.
when it comes to writing something off too quickly?
Mm.
And how do you identify that you're allowing the evaluation process to go further and longer than it should?
Gotcha. So both of those things would be something that you're making a choice out of fear. Um, the pressure of fear. So if you're like going through people rapidly and you're not even giving them a chance to show you themselves, like their real selves, um, you're either in it for what you can get,
Mm-hmm.
which I really hope that's not the case because that's more issues.
Like
But
the whole hit it and quit it
the hit
mentality.
it and quit it mentality that is very prevalent in our society. But if you give someone a fair shake and then evaluate, then that's healthy. If you do it too quickly, you're not actually really knowing them enough to make that evaluation. So you're either prejudging or you're projecting your assumptions, or assuming potential and making those decisions without actually having facts. So there's a fear in that that's like, oh, I'm running out of time, or oh, like you had this one very mild whatever
Mm-hmm.
that's not even a red flag that I just preferentially don't appreciate, or a quirk I don't like. And
Oh,
I'm
you
just
pop
gonna
your collar on
I'm
all
just
of your
gonna
shirts.
prejudge you and say like, well, then you must be this kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's the other end of it, which tends to be where I fall, where it's like, oh, but they could be this way, or they
Mm.
could. There's this potential of maybe if I wait long enough, this fruit will develop in their life that they are not actually producing.
Yeah.
Or not recognizing your own value in the situation and that it's unmatched and saying like I'll put up with whatever. Those could be reasons, those fear reasons of like I'll never find someone else, so I have to cling to this person and like we'll make it work, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
um but I would say either end of that is fear. You're either prejudging out of fear that it won't, that you are not perfect and neither are they and you'll have to be humans together,
Mm-hmm.
or waiting too long and recognizing that it's not a good match and being like, but I'm scared of change,
Yeah.
or I'm scared of being alone.
Yeah.
I would say on either end of that is fear, and that is really fear about like I don't actually know the future and I can't control that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I,
Those are both control responses.
I think it's really important because as you're talking, I'm just thinking about expectations. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are you expecting exactly as you go into this?
Yeah.
Like, when you go in for a job interview, for instance, are you expecting to get the job because you think you're overqualified, then you're pissed off because you don't get it because actually they were looking for something a little bit different? Um,
Yes.
with
Seen that.
a romantic relationship, are you going into this thinking, okay, well, this person, you know, I'm getting old. I'm 37. They're 38. We're both at the point where we're just giving up hope, so we'll just make it work.
Yeah.
Like you got to be careful of your timeline expectations. But
Yeah.
and if you look at it biblically, also, what was it, Sarah and
Oh,
Abraham?
Sarah is my saving grace, Tim.
Uh,
She had a baby at 90,
yeah.
like 90, And she got a word. Abraham got a word from the Lord. He's going to father nations. That's like a lot of kids, like a lot of kids. And yet, when it didn't happen in the timing that she did, she told Abraham to take her servant and have a baby with that kid because she was like, well, God said you're going to father nations. I'm holding on to that prophetic word with a death grip.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to make it happen, right? Despite letting God do his thing. That person had a baby. Then God gave her a baby. We're still seeing the effects of that one.
Mm-hmm.
Because of this fear response to prophetic words, even in the Christian community. One of the things with grieving a relationship in your 30s, right, is, oh man, these prophetic words happened. And I was just like, instead of like open-handing that and being like, oh, these are interesting, or I don't know how that's going to work out, put it in a mystery box of like, I don't know, we'll see. Death gripping that and being like, it has to look exactly like how I see it. And if it doesn't look exactly like how I see it, then it means God's not doing things. Or it means that he doesn't care. Or he's not following through. Or he's not reliable. Letting that rest freely, I think, is a big deal. I think the second part, right? So we've been talking a lot about getting into a relationship, how to decide if you're in it, deciding whether you stay in it. There's a whole component that almost no one ever talks about, and that's about grieving, right? So there's this whole other part because of boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you have to sit in, and we are not good at sitting in uncomfortable places. We're just not. We like happy things, we like uplifting things, and like, okay, you're crying, but like, you should really not cry because it's making me uncomfortable, so I need you to stop. So like sitting in grief and recognizing the vulnerability that says, I tried and it didn't work out. Right? For whatever reason. Positive, good. It's almost harder when it's positive. It's like, it didn't work out and I'm so bummed. And there isn't an answer to that. And there isn't necessarily like well, someone's going to come around the corner and it's all going to work out. Like, we're not guaranteed that. But to sit in that grief, especially sit with a friend in that grief, like, we can want so much to fix that and be like, oh no, he's coming.
Well, it's like Inside
She's
Out.
coming.
Joy was the one that was going around trying to fix everything, trying to make everything joyful. Inside Out, the movie that came out a couple years ago.
Oh, it's so good.
And at the end, and it's been out for years. Go watch it. So I'm not spoiling it.
No spoilers.
Somebody's grieving, and Joy cannot fix it.
Yeah.
Sadness goes up and sits by the person, just shares it with them, and that fixes it.
Yeah. And that's that community aspect, right? So like, none of this happens in a vacuum. It can't. It's not going to go well if it happens in a vacuum. We need community around us to be there in those grieving moments when those levels change. Because even, and you can know this, you're married, you had to grieve singleness. Whether you realized that was going to happen or not. Like, the transition causes grief, even if it's a good thing. Because
there's always a trade-off.
There's always a trade-off.
You can't get something without giving something up. Because when you do, when you get something and you think you paid no cost, you're paying it in spades through interest because you didn't choose it.
Yeah. Yeah. So either way, there's grief involved. And we as a culture, as a people, as a generation, haven't been raised to recognize, appreciate, sit in, or process through grief. And so with breakups, with endings of jobs, with marriage, with friendships that end, it's really, really incredibly important to understand your boundary, which boundaries are only, like, that whole concept is what your responsibility is and what your responsibility isn't. Like, when a relationship ends, I'm only responsible for me. In a relationship, I'm only responsible for me. So that's part of what is able to keep us in those healthy spaces with intimacy and commitment is I'm responsible for me, you're responsible for you. And as long as we keep that flexible boundary,
that clear line of scrimmage,
of who's in charge of themselves, then you can back away from those boundaries because you haven't crossed into each other's territory.
That's such a good point. I want to ask you one more question and then we'll wrap up. So we've been talking about commitment, intimacy, how it relates, how it plays in
Mm-hmm.
starting things, ending things, responding to things.
Mm-hmm.
How does this relate to our relationship with God?
So with God, the really beautiful part of it is that we actually don't have to hold back. It's the one relationship that you can have absolute commitment, absolute vulnerability, absolute intimacy, and not worry that it's going to fall apart on you. It's the only one because He loved first. He loves completely. He loves you 100% exactly where you are right now. He's going to love you 100% tomorrow. Doesn't matter. And He is the only being in the entire history of anything that can say that.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else falters. Everyone else loses faith. Everyone else loses hope. Everyone else gets distracted or caught up in their own mess and can't give you full capacity. He's the only one that can.
Mm-hmm.
And so He's the only one that's actually truly 100% reliable. And that can be really hard because, I mean, I don't physically see Him. I'm sure someone out there has like seen the form. I've seen a vision of Jesus, but it's not all the time,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But He is the only person that can be 100% there. He's the only thing that knows 100% of your inside, even before you say it. So He is the only person you can actually trust with 100% of your inside,
Mm-hmm.
because He's already chosen to love you.
Yeah.
And He's never going to choose anything different but to love you.
Yeah. I was in a conversation with somebody earlier today. I was talking about the whole concept of what the Bible is. What is the gospel exactly?
Uh-huh.
And we go to it looking for, just like we do in all other relationships, we're looking for the intimacy without the commitment. Like, I want prosperity gospel. I want money. I
that be
want
nice?
health. I want relationship. I want to do what I want. I want to cheat on my wife. I want to have multiple wives. There's all these things I want to do. And so we go to the Bible either looking to assuage our feelings of guilt
Or justify it.
or justify, or just like misprove God. We look, a lot of Christians especially look to the Gospels to say, well, here's why I'm better than you.
Yeah.
But the whole point of the gospel, like all of that stuff is not essential. Every bit of sin is not essential because it's all about the relationship. It's all about the intimacy and the commitment. When we go to biblically and look at things and it says, thou shalt not, or there's the impression that thou shalt not. It should be one of those things of, okay, God, I know that you're committed to me and you've given me every bit of intimacy and you love me fully. If that's the case, if you love me, then why is this present? Not, you're doing this, I'm not sure if you love me. Because that's what we do in our other relationships because we can't trust people.
Yeah. We make them a contract.
Yeah.
Instead of a commitment.
Yes. And being committed to God is like my commitment to my wife. Like, man, guys, if you are not married to somebody healthy, or if you're not in a relationship with somebody healthy, first of all, the person that you're in a relationship with does have that potential. And if you're married, please stay committed. Please give them the benefit of the doubt and support and encourage them until they become who God intended them to be.
For sure.
If you're not, man, my wife is an incredible person. Like, I am able to go to her and say very difficult things. And I have 110% trust that at the end of the day, through her feelings and all hardships, she's going to come back and give me a hug and say, hey, I'm choosing this relationship. And when you have somebody to do that, and she is the second person to do that in my life, second only to God.
Yeah.
And when you have somebody that's doing that, it's like, man, I am able to bear everything to you because there's nothing I have to hide. I'm not afraid that you're going to hurt me in any way because I know that if you hurt me, you acknowledge that you're acting in a way that you're not designed. And you're accountable to that because you put God before me. And every time I feel like God is sinning against me or telling me not to do something, I realize that I'm missing something. I'm realizing that I'm expecting more intimacy from Him than I've committed myself.
Yeah.
But hopping down off my pedestal, what final things do you have to say to whoever might be watching that's trying to navigate intimacy and commitment? Like, what are some things that God's put on your heart? What do you, something that we haven't covered yet? What are you thinking?
I think the biggest thing when navigating relationships of any kind really is to be honest with yourself. Now, that's hard because we have outside influences trying to tell us who we are all the time. But to really sit and take stock of, this is where my value is, and this is what I bring to the table. And therefore, because I know my value and because I know what I bring to the table, I can have an expectation of someone bringing value and adding value and bringing their own goodness to the table, because that's possible. You have a marriage that's like that. You're bringing your best to the table, and by that, it's creating more than the sum of its parts. So I think being really honest within that, I would also say, because outside voices influence so much of how we see ourselves, it's very important to know that the things that are telling you that you aren't good, even if they feel true, probably aren't. So I want to speak to that piece of there are things that can have been said to you a million times in your life, but they could have been lying to you from the very beginning. And so to really, from our perspective, the only person or being that can tell you the truth of who you are is God. If you don't know God, I would honestly tell you to test it and be like, prove yourself, God, because he will, because he loves you. And I know he loves you and he sees value in you. Or like we said, he wouldn't have died for you because he would have died just for you, whoever it is. I would say, have trusted friends. If you don't trust the voice that's in your head, or you don't see your own value, have people come around you who see your value and help you sort through where your value is. And then start saying those things over yourself. I'm kind and I'm loving and I'm good at relationship and I'm a good communicator and whatever. And as you get to know yourself in that way, you are able to hold space for other people's true selves as well. And that is really the space where good communication and good commitment and good understanding of intimacy can live. Because I'm holding my own value, I'm holding my own boundary and my own space, and I'm acknowledging that I am in charge of this space. And that creates a touching point for relationship to happen, for someone else's boundary to meet yours. So I would say really knowing who you are, really knowing your value, what you bring to the table will help you sort through whether or not something or someone is a good fit. And until you sit down and are honest with yourself about those things, you're gonna not know what's good for you. You're gonna not know what you actually need, and you're probably gonna keep choosing things that aren't good for you.
Yeah.
Because if you only see your dysfunctions, you will keep choosing things that feed into that dysfunction.
Yeah, and speaking about choice, guys, it is really important to tell yourself, I am. But it's equally as important to say, if I'm not right now, I am capable of in the future.
Oh, yeah. You can always choose to be who you want to be.
Yeah, because I know that early in my life, I kept telling myself, I'm loving, I'm kind, and I was not loving and kind. And I had to change my dialogue. I'm like, I'm not being loving and kind. And if you acknowledge it for what it is, it's like, I'm a piece of crap. But it's like, I'm not being loving and kind, but I'm capable.
Yeah.
I'm capable. I'm capable. I can be. And that's equally as important. So if you are in the echo chamber of disbelief about yourself, don't allow yourself to think that you're a piece of crap, because you have the ability to choose. We're still in the garden, guys. There's still the knowledge of good and evil, and you can choose to eat of the tree, or you can choose to have a relationship with God. You still have that choice regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. And a garden is honestly my favorite metaphor for our souls and ourselves, because I love plants and I love gardening, and you get to choose what's a weed. You define that. You get to choose what you uproot in your life and what you plant and what you sow, and you get to choose what you water and what you give light to, and you can choose what you kill. And all of that means that you're not a victim. You're very powerful, and the outcome of your life is up to you. It just is, because we're designed to be creative in our own lives. We are writing our own stories. as
Yeah.
we move.
So good. Well, Chelsea, you're on Instagram.
I am on Instagram.
You're an inspiring person. If people want to follow you and just kind of see what you're up to and be inspired, how would they do that?
I have an Instagram account called Popabilities. It's abilities with a PAP in front of it, because I really think that all of our giftings and talents come from God, and so He's Papa, so it's Popabilities. And then I have a second Instagram that I just started called Encourage Grams, which is just going to be...
Oh, wait, that's you?
That's me.
Oh,
Yeah, I just started
okay.
that. So that one's going to be more focused on my writing or encouraging thoughts or process, kind of curating a space for process and encouragement.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out.
Yeah.
And guys, thanks for hanging out. If you've made it the whole hour with us, I really appreciate you. I hope you got something good from this. If you have, share it with somebody else that needs it, man, because this is a hot topic. And I say hot topic because it's one of those things that's easily overlooked, but is one of the most freeing things when you understand how to apply it to your life. But I hope you got something from it. Take care. See you next time. Love you.